This video audits the official story of the Great Pyramid, testing the claim that it was a pharaoh's tomb against the unyielding laws of physics and engineering. The official explanation states the Great Pyramid of Giza was a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu, but the physical evidence directly and relentlessly contradicts this label. We are told it is a monument to death, yet it contains no mummy, no celebratory inscriptions, and no ritual artifacts, pointing instead to a machine built for a purpose we have forgotten, a solid-state device plugged directly into the planet. The math of the official construction story is the first and most glaring place it fails. The claim is 2.3 million limestone blocks were quarried, shaped, and stacked in roughly 20 years. Do the simplest check. Assuming a 10-hour workday, 365 days a year, with no holidays, no weather delays, and no mistakes, this schedule requires one finished block to be perfectly placed every 2 minutes. Reality does not care about our stories. It cares about cycle times. A modern, fully automated quarry and construction site would be strained to meet that kind of continuous output. You cannot cheat the clock. If a 21st century operation with robotics and diesel power would struggle, how could a Bronze Age project possibly match that pace? Look at the workforce numbers that are supposed to make this impossible timeline plausible. The official story credits a rotating force of approximately 100,000 skilled laborers. Think about the logistics of supporting a temporary city of that size in the middle of a desert. To audit this claim, you must calculate the daily resource burn. 100,000 adults require a minimum of 100,000 gallons of water per day just for drinking, and multiples of that for mixing mortar, cooling tools, and basic sanitation. Where did this water come from, and what system was used to distribute it on site? The Nile is close, but moving that volume of water consistently every single day is a monumental engineering project in itself. If the most basic life support input, water, cannot be accounted for, how can the entire construction narrative stand? Now add the next layer of logistics: food. Feeding 100,000 people engaged in hard physical labor requires an industrial-scale supply chain. You can check the caloric requirements. We are talking about tons of grain, meat, and produce delivered every single day without fail for 2 decades. This implies a network of farms, granaries, slaughterhouses, and transport barges operating at a national level, all dedicated to this single project. Any practitioner who has managed a remote work site knows that the food supply line is a critical failure point. Where is the archaeological evidence for this massive 20-year logistical operation? The story demands a logistical footprint for which there is zero physical proof. If the fuel for the workers is missing from the record, how can we trust the story about the work? Beyond food and water, consider the sanitation and waste management for a population of 100,000. A city of this size produces hundreds of tons of human waste and refuse daily. Be honest. Without a sophisticated sanitation system, you would have an immediate public health catastrophe. Disease would sweep through the workforce, halting construction indefinitely. The check is simple. Look for the archaeological footprint of a large-scale waste management system, or the mass graves that would result from its absence. Neither has been found. You cannot simply ignore the biological realities of concentrating that many people in one place. If they cannot explain how they prevented the workforce from being wiped out by disease, how can they explain the completion of the pyramid itself? Let's apply direct pressure to the core task, quarrying the stone. The main body of the pyramid is limestone, which we are told was cut with simple copper chisels and hard dolerite pounders. This is presented as fact, but it fails a basic material science audit. Copper has a Mohs hardness of about 3, while limestone is around 4. This means the tool is softer than the material it is supposed to cut. You can test this yourself. A copper chisel will deform, blunt, and become useless within minutes of being struck against a block of limestone. The tool consumption rate would have been astronomical. If their primary cutting tool was fundamentally incapable of performing the work efficiently, what does that say about the entire official method of construction? To make the copper tool theory work, you have to invent a secondary industry of an absurd scale. Think about the supply chain. To meet the 2-minute per block schedule, you would need a constant river of new and refurbished tools flowing to the quarry face. This requires thousands of smiths working around the clock, smelting copper ore, casting tens of thousands of chisels daily, and running a sharpening and distribution network. You can model the inputs. This operation would consume vast quantities of copper and, more importantly, fuel in the form of charcoal. This implies a level of deforestation and mining activity far beyond what is attributed to the Old Kingdom. Stop buying it. The tool itself creates a logistical bottleneck that makes the timeline impossible. If the story of the tools is a fiction, what does that make the story of the construction? The official story casually dismisses the weight of the average block, which is 2.5 tons, the modern equivalent of a large SUV. But many blocks are far, far heavier. The granite monoliths used to construct the king's chamber weigh up to 80 tons each. Stop buying the simple, sanitized explanation of ropes and sleds moving these across the sand. We must check the physical constraints. The tensile strength of ancient rope made from natural fibers has a hard limit. The friction coefficient of a wooden sled on sand, even when wetted, is high. You can calculate the sheer number of hands required to generate the necessary pulling force. It would be in the hundreds, possibly thousands, for a single 80-ton block, all needing to pull in perfect unison. This is not a practical or repeatable method. If the official method cannot account for moving the heaviest, most critical components of the structure, how can it be considered a complete or honest explanation? Let's put the Mira Papyrus, the only contemporary document that supposedly details construction, under the microscope. This document is often held up as proof of the official methods. But what does it actually say? Look, it describes a team of about 40 men barging smaller, outer casing stones from the Tura quarry to the Giza site. It does not mention the 2.5-ton core blocks, nor does it say a word about the 80-ton granite behemoths from Aswan. It details one small part of the finish work, not the heavy industrial lifting that formed 99% of the pyramid. Using this document to explain the entire construction is a deliberate misrepresentation. Reality does not care about convenient interpretations. If the only written evidence you have only accounts for the lightest and easiest part of the job, why is it presented as proof for the hardest part? Now, we must audit the ramp theory itself, the cornerstone of the official explanation for lifting the blocks. To move an 80-ton block up the ever-increasing height of the pyramid, you would need a ramp. What was this ramp made of?
The common theory suggests a simple structure of mud brick and desert sand. Any specialist in soil mechanics will tell you that such a structure has a maximum angle of repose and a severely limited load-bearing capacity. You can model the failure point. An 80-ton point load moving up a compacted sand ramp would cause catastrophic structural failure. It would be like trying to drive a tank up a sand dune. You cannot cheat the principles of geotechnics. If the proposed ramp is a structural impossibility from the start, then what was the real method for lifting these massive stones? Even if you could solve the structural problem, the ramp theory creates a new, even larger problem: the volume of material. To build a ramp with a gentle enough slope to be usable, one that reaches the upper levels of the 480-foot-tall pyramid, would require a volume of material that could rival or even exceed the pyramid itself. This creates a secondary construction project of an absurd, nation-breaking scale. And then, once the pyramid is complete, this entire monumental structure must be painstakingly removed. The check is a simple volume calculation. The official story requires the construction and demolition of a second pyramid just to build the first. This is logistical nonsense. If the solution to the puzzle is even more impossible than the puzzle itself, what does that tell you about the solution? Let's analyze the material choice for the King's Chamber with a truly critical eye. The builders traveled hundreds of miles south to Aswan to quarry enormous single blocks of granite. The official reason given is that granite possesses superior compressive strength, which was necessary to support the millions of tons of limestone pressing down from above. But this explanation is functionally insufficient. You can verify this with a basic engineering audit. The exact same structural support could have been achieved by using multiple, smaller granite blocks of, say, 10 or 20 tons each. This modular approach would have drastically reduced the risk, the difficulty, and the cost of transport and placement. Think. Why choose the single most difficult, most dangerous, and most expensive engineering option available? If the goal was simply strength, why did they select a method that maximized every conceivable project risk without providing any additional structural benefit? The specific properties of that Aswan granite are the key. It is not just strong, it is exceptionally rich in quartz crystals, up to 55% by mass. Look, any practitioner in material science or physics knows that quartz is a piezoelectric material. When subjected to intense mechanical pressure, it generates an electric potential. The official narrative treats the granite as nothing more than a strong, inert building material like a simple brick. It completely ignores this fundamental, well-known physical property. But what if this property was not ignored by the builders? What if it was the entire reason for their choice? What if the immense pressure from the limestone above was not a structural problem to be solved, but a necessary input for a massive piezoelectric transducer? The official story of structural support is a fiction that fails to explain the extreme and unnecessary scale of the blocks. So what function does it actually obscure? Consider the pyramid's original external finish. The rough, stepped core we see today is just the skeleton. It was originally sheathed in brilliant white, highly polished Tura limestone. These casing stones were not crudely stacked. They were fitted together with a precision so fine that a knife blade could not be inserted into the joints between them. The official story claims this was purely for aesthetic reasons, to make the pyramid gleam in the sun like a jewel. But this explanation ignores the material science. Polished Tura limestone is a superb dielectric, which means it is an excellent electrical insulator. The check is simple. Measure its conductivity. The entire pyramid was therefore encased in a massive, precision-fitted, electrically insulating shell. Why go to such extraordinary lengths of labor and precision for a cosmetic finish? In high-end engineering, precision on this scale always serves a function, and a seamless insulating shell is designed to contain or manage energy. If it wasn't just for appearances, what was the pyramid being insulated from? Or what was it containing? Now we must examine the internal structure not as a series of rooms, but as a complete, integrated system. Official Egyptology has assigned simple, domestic labels to its components: the King's Chamber, the Queen's Chamber, and the Grand Gallery. But these labels impose a function that the physical evidence does not support. They are a form of narrative control. The so-called air shafts, for example, are a prime example of this misdirection. They are not for ventilation. Some were found sealed at both ends, and others do not even reach the outside of the pyramid. They are narrow, perfectly straight, and aligned with incredible accuracy to specific regions of the sky. The official explanation is that these were symbolic pathways for the pharaoh's soul to ascend to the stars. Be honest. This is an attempt to mask a technical specification with a poetic metaphor. You do not need laser-like precision for a symbolic path. This is the precision of an instrument, a waveguide, or a targeting system. If these shafts were not for air or for a soul's allegorical journey, what were they designed to transmit or receive? Let's apply that same unforgiving scrutiny to the Queen's Chamber. The name is a pure invention by early explorers. There is zero archaeological evidence it was ever intended for a queen or any royal personage. The room is stark, undecorated, and was found completely empty. A key piece of physical evidence, consistently ignored by the official story, is the thick salt encrustation found on the walls. You can test for the chemical residues. This white powder, up to ½ an inch thick, is a mixture of calcium carbonate, sodium chloride, and calcium sulfate, suggesting a chemical or electrochemical reaction occurred there over a long period. A tomb is, by its very design, a static, inert environment meant to preserve. The presence of chemical byproducts indicates an active process. The official story has no explanation for this. It simply ignores the evidence. If this was a place of chemical reactions, what was the process, and what did it produce? The specific geometry of the Queen's Chamber is also highly specific and non-random. It has a gabled or pitched ceiling that creates unique acoustic properties. Any sound engineer or physicist will tell you that room geometry is a critical factor in managing and focusing sound waves. This is not accidental architecture. It is intentional design. When you combine the evidence of chemical reactions with a purpose-built acoustic chamber, the space looks less like a failed burial room and more like a purpose-built reaction chamber. What breaks first in the official story is the lazy assumption that every space must have a funerary purpose. Once you discard that intellectual straitjacket, the evidence points directly toward a technical function. If it wasn't for a burial, what was the purpose of a resonant chamber designed for chemical processes? The Grand Gallery
presents an even greater, more profound challenge to the official narrative. It is a long, soaring, corbelled hallway with an incredibly high ceiling leading up to the king's chamber. Its design is an acoustic masterpiece. The hard, smooth, angled surfaces of the granite walls are designed to amplify and focus sound with incredible efficiency. You can model the acoustic resonance of this space with modern software and see that it is tuned. Why would anyone build a monumental sound amplifier as the entrance to a silent burial chamber? The official story dismisses this as purely ceremonial architecture, designed to inspire awe.
That is a label, not an explanation. It is a thinly veiled admission of ignorance. A space with these precise dimensions, materials, and properties is, in functional engineering terms, a resonant cavity or a waveguide. What energy was it designed to amplify and channel? Look closer at the practical, physical details of the Grand Gallery. Along the base of the walls on both sides runs a series of 27 evenly spaced notches or slots, cut at a consistent angle. Their purpose is officially unknown. The common, lazy suggestion is that they held statues or perhaps beams for a temporary construction ramp. But their precise, angled design and regular spacing point to a more technical application. They are perfectly positioned to hold a series of vertical resonators, like massive tuning forks, which could be excited into vibration. Stop buying the story of decoration. Every single feature of this space, its specific length, its height, its corbelled ceiling, its hard granite surfaces, and these mysterious slots, points to a single, integrated function: acoustic resonance on an industrial scale. If the gallery was a machine component, not a hallway, what was its role in the machine's operation? This brings us to the core contradiction that completely invalidates the entire tomb theory. The Great Pyramid is identified as a tomb, yet it fails every single diagnostic test for being one. We must run the checklist as if it were a crime scene. Is there a mummy or any human remains attributable to the original owner? No. Are there the hieroglyphic texts, the spells from the Book of the Dead, required to guide the pharaoh to the afterlife? No. The walls are completely bare. The only marking that even references Khufu is a crude splash of red paint in an upper, inaccessible stress-relieving chamber, a marking that many analysts believe is a modern forgery planted by its discoverer. Is there any evidence of grave goods, treasure, or ritual equipment? None has ever been found. The pyramid is a sterile, anonymous, functional void. How can the grandest tomb in history be the only one that contains absolutely nothing associated with a burial? Let's pressure test the centerpiece of the king's chamber, the so-called sarcophagus. It is a roughly hewn granite box, completely devoid of any inscription or decoration. Its lid has never been found, and there is no evidence one was ever made. Crucially, and this is the logistical checkmate, the box is slightly larger than the passageway leading into the chamber. This means it had to have been placed in the room as the pyramid was being built around it. Think about the direct implications of this. It was not brought in during a funeral ceremony. It was a pre-installed piece of core equipment. You cannot cheat logistics. The official story of a burial requires a funeral procession and the placement of the sarcophagus as a final act. The physical evidence makes this scenario impossible. If it wasn't intended for a body, what was this precision-placed granite box for? Now we must audit the incentives. Why would a pharaoh commission a project of this magnitude? The official story claims it was to secure his immortality and project his divine power. This motive is perfectly valid for other pharaohs and other tombs, but the design choices for the Great Pyramid do not align with that incentive structure. An Egyptian pharaoh's journey to the afterlife was entirely dependent on ritual, iconography, and magical texts inscribed on the tomb walls. His tomb was his vessel and his guidebook. The Great Pyramid has none of these essential, non-negotiable components. Reality does not care about our modern assumptions about royal vanity. If your primary goal is a successful afterlife according to your own religious beliefs, you do not build a silent, sterile, text-free machine. You build the lavishly decorated, text-filled tombs found in the Valley of the Kings. If the pyramid fails to meet the most basic religious requirements for an Egyptian royal burial, then that was never its purpose. What was the real incentive? Consider the staggering, almost incomprehensible cost of the project. A 20-year construction. Period. A city-sized workforce and a nationwide supply chain for materials. This was the most expensive undertaking of the ancient world by an order of magnitude. It consumed a vast portion of the Old Kingdom's gross domestic product. Any practitioner who manages large-scale infrastructure projects knows that an expense of this magnitude must be justified by a proportional return on investment. The official reason, a tomb for one man's ego, is wildly insufficient for this level of national effort, especially when the final product does not even function as a tomb. What if the pyramid was not a cost center, but a productive asset? What if it generated something so valuable that it justified an expense that could have built fleets of ships, funded entire armies, or fed the nation for a generation? If it was not a tomb, what kind of power plant was it? We have to look at the pyramid's location not as a matter of convenience, but as a deliberate and critical design choice. It is not built on just any patch of empty desert. The Giza Plateau sits atop a massive limestone aquifer, with water flowing through underground channels and cavities. The movement of water through subterranean rock can generate a weak electrical charge through a phenomenon known as streaming potential, which is a component of the Earth's natural telluric currents. So, you have a natural source of low-level energy in the ground, and directly above it, the builders constructed a massive, insulated structure with a piezoelectric core. Be honest, does this sound like a coincidence? In any engineering discipline, when you find a power source placed in direct proximity to a potential transducer and amplifier, you do not call it a coincidence. You call it a system design. The official narrative treats the pyramid as an object isolated from its environment. But what if the pyramid's specific location is the absolute key to its entire function? Let's review the multiple, catastrophic failure modes of the official narrative. It is a brittle story, held together by a series of lazy assumptions that shatter under the slightest inspection. Assumption 1. The builders used only primitive tools, like copper chisels. This fails to explain the precision cutting of granite and the impossible logistics of the construction timeline. Assumption 2. The motivation was purely symbolic and religious. This fails to explain the machine-like engineering, the acoustic tuning, and the complete and total lack of religious iconography. Assumption 3. It was a sealed tomb that was simply robbed in antiquity. This fails to explain why the sarcophagus was unfinished, lidless, and installed during construction, or why there is zero trace, no fragments, no dust, of any burial ever having occurred. Every single pillar of the official story
cracks and collapses under a basic engineering audit. If the established model is fundamentally broken, what model actually fits the data? Think about the precision of the entire structure. The base of the pyramid covers 13 acres and is level to within a fraction of an inch.
Its four sides are aligned to the cardinal directions with an accuracy that modern surveyors would find challenging to replicate without GPS and laser theodolites. This is not the work of people using simple sighting sticks and plumb bobs. This is the work of masters of geodesy and large-scale engineering. The official story explains this away as symbolic alignment with the stars for the pharaoh's soul. This is another post hoc justification, a story invented to paper over a level of technical skill that is otherwise unexplained. You cannot cheat the need for a functional reason. In any complex machine, precision is never for its own sake. It is a prerequisite for the machine to function correctly. If the function isn't burial, what function demanded that the entire 13-acre structure be a perfectly leveled and aligned scientific instrument? Let's assemble the physical evidence without the distorting lens of the tomb label. What we have is a massive structure built on an aquifer, a known source of telluric currents and seismic vibration. It is encased in a high-quality dielectric insulator. Its internal chambers are constructed from granite, rich in piezoelectric quartz. The primary gallery is a powerful acoustic resonator. A series of shafts are aimed at the sky like waveguides. There is clear physical evidence of chemical reactions in one of the core chambers, and the entire system is energized by the immense, constant mechanical pressure of its own mass, which is the necessary input to activate the piezoelectric core. Look at the inputs and outputs. The inputs are seismic vibrations and telluric currents from the Earth. The output is what? The entire design points to a machine. What kind of machine was it? This leads to a hypothesis that, while unconventional, is the only one that aligns with all of the physical evidence without contradiction. The Great Pyramid was not a tomb, but a geothermal power plant. It was designed as a coupled oscillator, built to resonate with the natural vibrations of the planet. The flow of water in the aquifer below generated an initial electrical charge and vibrations, which the pyramid's massive body then gathered and amplified. The king's chamber, acting as a giant piezoelectric transducer under millions of tons of pressure, converted this mechanical energy into electrical energy. The Grand Gallery and other chambers were acoustic resonators designed to amplify this energy to a usable level. The pyramid was built to tap into the natural, inexhaustible power of the Earth itself. It is a piece of forgotten high technology. This power plant model explains the vast array of evidence that the tomb theory simply ignores or dismisses. It explains the specific choice of materials, like the quartz-rich granite and the insulating Tura limestone. It explains the extreme, seemingly obsessive precision of the construction and its astronomical and geodetic alignment. It explains the bizarre internal geometry, the acoustic properties of the chambers, and the chemical residues found within. Most importantly, it provides a powerful, tangible incentive for such a colossal investment of national resources. It explains the central contradiction that the tomb theory can never resolve. Why the world's most famous tomb contains no body and no trace of a burial. The sarcophagus was not for a corpse. It was a resonant box, the final component in the energy conversion system. The pyramid is not a symbol of death. It is a blueprint of a lost science. Let's re-examine the 5 so-called stress-relieving chambers above the king's chamber. The official story presents them as a clever, last-minute structural feature to prevent the massive granite ceiling from cracking under the weight above. But let's apply pressure to that idea. What if the goal was not to relieve stress, but to focus and manage it? In a piezoelectric system, the energy output is directly proportional to the applied stress. To maximize the power generated, you would need to concentrate as much mechanical pressure as possible onto your transducer, the granite chamber. The design, therefore, is not about relieving stress. It is about concentrating it at a specific focal point. The chambers above, with their rough-hewn granite beams, are better understood as harmonic tuning chambers, designed to manage the intense vibrations and prevent the entire system from shaking itself to pieces at resonance. It was not a safety feature for a static building. It was a regulation system for a dynamic machine. If the design isn't to prevent structural failure, is it to manage operational output? The official narrative asks us to believe that the most advanced engineering feat of the ancient world was built with the softest metal tools and brute force, all for a symbolic tomb that fails every single test of being a tomb. It is a story that acknowledges the builders' immense labor, but profoundly insults their intelligence. It assumes they engaged in decades of technically brilliant, precision-obsessed work for a purpose that their own design proves is false. You cannot cheat logic. The object on the ground at Giza is a piece of high technology. Its materials are chosen for their energetic properties. Its geometry is tuned for resonance. Its location is chosen for its access to telluric energy. Stop buying the fiction. It's not a tomb. It is a power plant. So we are left with a clear and unavoidable verdict. The official story of the Great Pyramid of Giza as a tomb for Pharaoh Khufu is a fiction. It is a narrative completely and utterly contradicted by the physical evidence of the structure itself. It fails to account for the scale of the construction, the choice of materials, the precision of the engineering, the internal geometry, and the complete absence of any funerary evidence whatsoever. It is a story that crumbles under the slightest analytical pressure. The hard constraints of logistics, physics, and basic engineering show that the pyramid was designed and built as a functional machine. The official story is insufficient and must be discarded. An alternative hypothesis remains the most plausible model that fits all the facts. The Great Pyramid is a resonance machine, built to harness the energy of the planet. Its limestone body and granite core functioned as a massive transducer, converting ambient vibration into usable energy. It is a stationary power plant tuned to the fundamental frequency of the Earth itself. This model aligns with the evidence, explains the sophisticated engineering choices, and provides a motive that fits the monumental scale of the undertaking. The Great Pyramid is not a message of death. It is a blueprint of a lost technology. The evidence is there, locked in the stone, waiting to be audited. We just have to be willing to look past the comfortable labels we have been given and see the object for what it is, a silent, sleeping giant of ancient engineering. The greatest wonder of the ancient world is not a tomb, it's a machine. And the real mystery is not how they built it, but how we managed to forget what it was for. If you believe official stories should be tested against real-world constraints, subscribe for more forensic breakdowns.